The telegram arrived at the Crawford family ranch in Boston on a blistering July afternoon in 1878, and when Beatrice Crawford read the contents, her hands trembled so violently that the paper slipped through her fingers and landed on the Persian rug beneath her feet. Her father stood by the window of his study, shoulders squared, jaw set in that familiar stubborn line that had built an empire of textile mills and railroad investments. He refused to look at her as he delivered his ultimatum in a voice cold enough to freeze the summer heat right out of the room. "You will go to Georgetown, Colorado, and you will remain there until you have learned the consequences of your reckless behavior," he said, each word measured and deliberate. "Your uncle's ranch is remote enough that you cannot possibly embarrass this family further. Perhaps hard work and isolation will teach you the obedience and decorum that your mother and I have failed to instill." Beatrice had retrieved the telegram from the floor, reading it again, though she had memorized every word. Her Uncle Thomas, her mother's brother, had agreed to take her in at her father's request. The arrangement was indefinite. That single word felt like a life sentence. "Father, please," she began, but he raised his hand to silence her. "You defied me, Beatrice. You stood before 200 of Boston's finest families and refused to marry Harold Pemberton. You humiliated him, you humiliated me, and you humiliated our entire family name." His voice rose with each accusation. "I have indulged your independence, your books, your ridiculous notions about women's rights and education. But when you turned down a proposal from one of the wealthiest families in Massachusetts, you crossed a line from which there is no return." "I do not love him," Beatrice said, hating how her voice cracked. "I barely know him." "Love." Her father finally turned to face her, and the disgust in his eyes cut deeper than his words. "You are 22 years old, well past the age when most women of your station have married and begun families. Love is a luxury you can no longer afford. But you have made your choice, and now you will live with it. Perhaps a year or two in the wilderness will change your perspective." 3 weeks later, Beatrice found herself on a train heading west, watching the civilized landscape of her childhood disappear into an endless expanse of plains and mountains. Her mother had wept when they said goodbye, pressing a cameo brooch into Beatrice's palm and whispering apologies that changed nothing. Her 2 younger sisters had hugged her fiercely, promising to write, while her older brother had simply shaken his head as if she were a problem he was relieved to see solved. The journey took 6 days, each one carrying her farther from everything she had ever known. She changed trains in Chicago, then again in Denver, each connection taking her deeper into territory that felt increasingly foreign. The women's fashions grew simpler, the men rougher, the towns smaller and more spread out. By the time she boarded the final leg to Georgetown, she was the only woman in the passenger car, and the stares of the other travelers made her acutely aware of how out of place she looked in her traveling dress of emerald silk, with its bustle and intricate embroidery. Georgetown sat nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains that seemed to scrape the sky itself. The town had sprung up around silver mining, and even from the train platform, Beatrice could see the evidence of recent prosperity in the well-maintained buildings lining the main street. But it was still unmistakably the frontier, raw and rough in ways Boston had never been. Her Uncle Thomas was waiting on the platform, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he spotted her among the disembarking passengers. He was her mother's eldest brother, a man who had left Boston 30 years ago to seek his fortune in the West. He had found it not in mining but in cattle, building a ranch that supplied beef to the mining camps scattered throughout the Colorado Territory. "Beatrice," he said, pulling her into an embrace that smelled of leather and sage. You have grown into the very image of your mother, though I confess, when your father's letter arrived, I had hoped the resemblance was only physical." "Uncle Thomas," she replied, stepping back to look at him properly. He was tall and lean, his hair more gray than the brown she remembered from his last visit to Boston 15 years ago. "I am sorry to impose on you this way." "Nonsense. You are family and you are welcome for as long as you need." He took her trunk from the porter and began walking toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. "Though I will not lie to you, Beatrice, the ranch is not Boston. Life here is hard, the work is constant, and the comforts are few. Your father seems to believe this will be a punishment, but I have always found honest labor to be its own reward." The ride from Georgetown to the ranch took nearly 2 hours, following a rough trail that climbed into the foothills, before opening into a wide valley where cattle grazed on summer grass. The ranch house was a sprawling structure of logs and stone, practical rather than beautiful, but solid and well built. Behind it stood a large barn, several outbuildings, and a series of corrals. "I run about 300 head, Thomas explained as they approached. "I have 4 hands who work the ranch full-time, and we hire on extras during roundup and branding. It is a good operation, profitable enough to live comfortably and save for the future." He did not mention his wife or children, and Beatrice remembered her mother saying that Thomas had never married, content with his solitary life in the mountains. That suited her fine. She wanted no more lectures about duty and marriage. The interior of the house surprised her. While the furniture was simple and the decorations sparse, everything was clean and well maintained. The main room featured a large stone fireplace, comfortable chairs, and shelves lined with books. Through one doorway she could see a kitchen with a cast iron stove, and through another, a hallway that presumably led to bedrooms. "Your room is upstairs," Thomas said, carrying her trunk toward a staircase. "I apologize that it is small, but it has a window with a view of the mountains that I have always found peaceful." The room was indeed small, barely large enough for a bed, a dresser, and a washstand, but it was clean and the quilts on the bed looked warm. The window faced west, and through it, Beatrice could see the sun beginning its descent toward the peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. "Thank you," she said softly. "This will do nicely." Thomas set down her trunk and turned to face her, his expression serious. "Beatrice, I want you to understand something. I agreed to your father's request because I believe you deserve a choice in your own life. But this is not a hotel, and I cannot afford to feed anyone who does not contribute. Tomorrow morning, you will begin learning the work of this ranch. I will not coddle you or make allowances for your upbringing. If you are to stay here, you will earn your keep. Is that understood?" "Yes," she said, surprised by the relief she felt. Hard work sounded infinitely preferable to the idle life of social calls and needlework that had filled her days in Boston. "I am ready to learn." "Good. We rise before dawn. I suggest you get some rest." But sleep proved elusive. Beatrice lay in the narrow bed, listening to sounds she had never heard before. The call of night birds, the distant howl of something wild, the creak and settle of an unfamiliar house. She thought of her room in Boston with its 4-poster bed and velvet curtains, her closet full of dresses she would likely never wear again, the life she had rejected without fully understanding what would replace it. She had no regrets about refusing Harold Pemberton. The man was 43 years old, humorless, and had made it clear during their brief courtship that he expected a wife who would be seen and not heard, who would manage his household and bear his children and never question his authority. The thought of spending her life in such a cage had been unbearable, no matter how gilded. But lying in the darkness of this small room, thousands of miles from everything familiar, Beatrice could not help but wonder if she had simply traded one prison for another. Morning arrived with a knock on her door while the sky was still dark. Beatrice dressed quickly in the simplest dress she owned, a cotton day dress in navy blue that seemed absurdly fancy even as she buttoned it. She pinned her dark hair into a simple bun and hurried downstairs to find Thomas already in the kitchen, frying eggs and bacon at the stove. "Coffee is on the table," he said without looking up. "After breakfast, I will introduce you to the hands and show you around the property." The coffee was stronger than anything Beatrice had ever tasted, and the breakfast was hearty and filling. They ate in companionable silence as the sky outside slowly brightened from black to gray to the soft pink of dawn. The 4 ranch hands were already at work in the barn when Thomas and Beatrice arrived. They turned at the sound of footsteps, and Beatrice felt their eyes assess her with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. "Gentlemen," Thomas said, "this is my niece Beatrice Crawford from Boston. She will be staying with us indefinitely and learning the ranch work. I expect you to treat her with respect and to answer her questions as you would for any new hand." 3 of the men nodded and murmured greetings. The 4th simply stared, and Beatrice found herself staring back, unable to look away from the most striking man she had ever seen. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and lean muscle evident even through his work shirt. His hair was dark, almost black, and fell to his collar in waves he had not bothered to tame. But it was his eyes that held her attention, gray as storm clouds and just as turbulent, set in a face that was all hard angles and sun-bronzed skin. He looked to be in his mid-20s, young enough that a few years separated them at most, but his eyes held in weariness that seemed much older. "This is Wade Harper," Thomas said, gesturing to the tall man. "He has been with me for 5 years and knows this ranch better than anyone save myself. Wade, I would like you to take particular responsibility for teaching Beatrice. You have the patience for it." Something flickered across Wade's face, gone too quickly for Beatrice to identify. "Boss, with all due respect, I have work to do. Teaching a city girl how not to spook the cattle is not in my job description." "It is now," Thomas said mildly, but there was steel beneath the words. "Unless you have somewhere else you would rather be working." Wade's jaw tightened, but he nodded once curtly. "Yes, sir." The other 3 hands had the grace to look uncomfortable. One of them, a grizzled man who introduced himself as Pete, cleared his throat. "Boss, maybe it would be better if Wade will teach her," Thomas interrupted. "That is final. Now all of you have cattle to check. Get to it." The men dispersed, but Wade remained, his eyes fixed on some point past Beatrice's shoulder. Up close, she could see a scar running along his jawline and another disappearing into his hairline above his left eye. His hands, when he finally crossed his arms over his chest, were calloused and scarred as well. "I will leave you to it," Thomas said, clapping Wade on the shoulder before heading back toward the house. "Wade, start with the basics. Beatrice, listen and learn." For a long moment after Thomas left, neither of them spoke. Then Wade finally looked directly at her, and Beatrice felt the full weight of his displeasure. "Let me make something clear, Miss Crawford," he said, his voice low and rough. "I do not have time to babysit a rich girl who is playing at being a ranch hand. This is hard work, dangerous work, and it requires focus and commitment. If you are here because your father sent you as punishment, then I suggest you write him a letter of apology and get yourself back to Boston where you belong." The dismissal in his tone sparked something hot and defiant in Beatrice's chest. She lifted her chin and met his gaze without flinching. "My father sent me here because I refused to marry a man I did not love. If that makes me worthy of punishment in his eyes, so be it. But I am here, Mr. Harper, and I have every intention of learning this work and earning my keep. Whether you have the patience to teach me or not is your concern, but I will not be dismissed or belittled simply because I was born in a city." Something shifted in Wade's eyes, a flicker of surprise or perhaps respect. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile but close. "Fair enough, Miss Crawford. But do not expect me to go easy on you. If you cannot keep up, that is your problem, not mine." "I would not have it any other way," Beatrice said, and so began the strangest and most challenging months of Beatrice's life. Wade Harper was true to his word. He did not go easy on her, did not make allowances for her upbringing or her inexperience. That first day, he set her to mucking out stalls in the barn, a task that left her arms aching and her dress stained with things she tried not to think about too closely. When she finished, he inspected her work with a critical eye, pointed out 3 stalls she had missed, and told her to do them again. The second day, he taught her how to curry and brush the horses, how to check their hooves for stones and their legs for swelling. His hands were surprisingly gentle as he demonstrated on a patient mare, and Beatrice found herself watching the way his fingers moved with practiced ease over the horse's coat. "Pay attention, Miss Crawford," he said without looking at her. "I will not repeat myself." She learned to saddle a horse, to mount without assistance, to sit properly in the saddle for hours at a time. She learned which plants the cattle could eat and which would make them sick, how to read the weather in the shape of clouds, how to spot signs of predators in tracks and scat. She learned that blisters would form and then harden into calluses, that her muscles would scream in protest before they grew strong, that exhaustion could be so complete that she fell asleep over her dinner plate. Wade was a harsh teacher, but a thorough one. He never raised his voice, never lost his patience, but he also never offered praise or encouragement. When she did something correctly, he simply moved on to the next lesson. When she made a mistake, he corrected her with the same level tone and then made her practice until she got it right. The other hands treated her with a mixture of amusement and respect. Pete, the oldest of the group, took to calling her Miss B and sometimes slipped her hard candy from the store in town. The other 2, brothers named Jack and Sam, made a game of betting on how long she would last before giving up and heading back east. She heard them discussing it one morning in the barn, arguing over whether she would make it through the first month or the first week. She made it through the first month, then the second. Summer began to turn toward autumn, and Beatrice felt herself changing in ways that went deeper than her sun-darkened skin and work-hardened hands. She learned to find satisfaction in a job well done, to take pride in her growing competence, to appreciate the bone-deep weariness that came from a full day of honest labor. And she learned that Wade Harper was far more complex than his gruff exterior suggested. She discovered it by accident one evening in late September. She had finished her chores and was walking back to the house when she heard music coming from the bunkhouse where the hands slept. Curious, she moved closer and peered through the window. Wade sat on his bunk with a fiddle tucked under his chin, his fingers flying over the strings as he coaxed out a melody that was both haunting and beautiful. His eyes were closed, his face transformed by an expression of peace that she had never seen when he was working. The other hand sat listening, Pete with his eyes closed and a slight smile on his weathered face, Jack and Sam cleaning their tack with the careful movements of men trying not to disturb something precious. Beatrice stood transfixed until the song ended. When Wade opened his eyes, they found hers through the window as if he had known she was there all along. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then Wade set down the fiddle and walked to the door, stepping outside into the gathering darkness. "That was beautiful," Beatrice said softly. "It is rude to spy on people, Miss Crawford," Wade replied, but there was no real censure in his voice. I apologize. I heard the music and was curious. She hesitated, then added, I did not know you played. There is a great deal you do not know about me. I would like to, she said, surprised by her own boldness. To know you, I mean. We have worked together for months now, but you remain a mystery. Wade leaned against the bunkhouse wall, his face half shadowed in the twilight. There is not much to know. I am a ranch hand. I work, I sleep, I work some more. That is the whole story. I do not believe that. Everyone has a story. Then I will make you a trade, Miss Crawford. I will tell you my story if you tell me why you really refused to marry that man in Boston. And I want the truth, not some romantic notion about love. Beatrice considered refusing, but something in Wade's expression made her want to be honest. Harold Pemberton was not a kind man. Oh, he was polite in public, charming even, but I saw how he treated servants, how he spoke to people he considered beneath him. And I saw how he looked at me, as if I were a particularly fine horse he was considering purchasing. He did not want a wife. He wanted an ornament, a brood mare, a thing he could own and control. She wrapped her arms around herself against the cooling air. I know my father believes I was foolish to refuse him, that I threw away security and status and comfort, but I could not do it. I could not spend my life with a man who would slowly extinguish everything that makes me who I am. Wade was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. That took courage, or stupidity. I am still not certain which. Courage, Wade repeated firmly. Stupidity would have been marrying him and spending the rest of your life regretting it. He pushed off from the wall and turned to face her fully. My turn then. I came to Colorado 5 years ago running from a different life. I was engaged to be married, had a job working for my father's freight company, had everything planned out neat and tidy. Then I discovered my father had been cheating his customers for years, shorting shipments and pocketing the difference. When I confronted him, he offered to cut me in on the profits, said it was good business, that everyone did it, that I was a fool if I let morality stand in the way of money. What did you do? I went to the authorities, testified against my own father. He went to prison, the company folded, and my mother and 3 younger sisters lost everything. My fiancé ended our engagement, said she could never marry a man who would betray his own family. She was probably right. The whole town turned against me, so I left, came west, and never looked back. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. You did the right thing. Wade laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Did I? My sisters had to take jobs as seamstresses to survive. My mother died 2 years ago and I was not there. I did what I thought was right, Miss Crawford, but the cost was higher than I could have imagined. So when your uncle told me you had been sent here as punishment, I assumed you were just another spoiled rich girl who needed to be taught a lesson. I was wrong. You have worked harder than most men I know, never complained, never quit. And that makes me realize that maybe whoever sent you here did you the greatest favor of your life. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Beatrice searched Wade's face, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. He was not cruel or cold, but wounded, carrying scars that went deeper than the ones visible on his skin. Thank you, she said quietly, for telling me, and for teaching me, even when you did not want to. You made it easy, Wade said, and this time there was the hint of a smile on his face. Stubborn as a mule, but a quick learner. I believe that is the first compliment you have ever given me. Do not let it go to your head, Miss Crawford. You still have a lot to learn. But something had shifted between them that evening, a wall coming down that neither of them had acknowledged was there. Over the following weeks, Beatrice found Wade seeking her out more often, their conversations extending beyond just the work at hand. He told her about his sisters, all three of them married now with families of their own, and the letters they still sent despite everything that had happened. She told him about her own siblings, about her childhood in Boston, about the books she loved, and the dreams she had harbored of attending college, dreams her father had dismissed as foolish. The work continued, growing more challenging as autumn settled fully into the mountains. Thomas announced they would be moving the cattle from the high summer pastures down to the lower grazing lands before the first snow. It was a 3-day operation that required all hands, and Beatrice insisted on coming along despite Thomas's concerns. "It will be rough camping, Bea," her uncle said, using the nickname he had adopted. "Cold nights, no comforts, and long days in the saddle." "I can handle it," she assured him, and Wade, standing nearby, nodded once in agreement. The cattle drive began on a cold October morning, 6 people moving 300 head of cattle down from the mountains. Beatrice had never experienced anything like it. The constant motion and noise, the smell of cattle and dust, the need to stay alert every moment. Wade rode near her, his presence both protective and encouraging, calling out instructions when she needed them, and trusting her to handle situations when she could. On the second night, as they sat around the campfire eating beans and biscuits, Pete began telling stories about the early days of the ranch, when Thomas had run the whole operation with just 2 hands. The conversation eventually turned to each person's hopes for the future, and Beatrice found herself listening intently as Wade spoke. "I want my own place someday," he said, staring into the fire. "Nothing big, just enough land to run a small herd, maybe build a house, put down real roots. I have been drifting for 5 years now, and I am tired of it. I want to belong somewhere again." "That sounds nice," Beatrice said, and their eyes met across the flames. "I hope you find it." "Maybe I already have," Wade replied. And though his voice was casual, the look in his eyes was anything but. That night, Beatrice lay in her bedroll staring up at stars so thick they seemed to form a river of light across the sky. She had never seen stars like this in Boston, had never felt so small and yet so connected to something vast and eternal. And she realized with startling clarity that she did not want to go back east. This life, for all its hardships, felt more real and more right than anything she had known before. The cattle were safely moved to their winter pastures, and November brought the first snow. The ranch work shifted to focus on maintaining the herd through the winter, supplementing their grazing with hay, breaking ice on water troughs, and watching for signs of illness or predators. The days grew short and the nights long, and Beatrice spent more time in the house, helping her uncle with the account books and learning how to manage the business side of the ranch. But she still went out to work with the hands whenever she could, and she still found herself seeking out Wade's company, drawn to him in ways that both excited and frightened her. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she could not quite read, intense and searching, as if trying to solve some complicated problem. It all came to a head on a freezing December afternoon when one of the cows got stuck in a partially frozen creek. Wade and Beatrice went out together to help it, working in tandem to get ropes around the animal and pull it to safety. But the bank was slippery with ice, and as the cow lurched forward, Beatrice lost her footing and fell, sliding toward the frigid water. Wade caught her, his arm going around her waist and hauling her back against his chest with such force that they both tumbled into the snow. They landed in a tangle of limbs, Wade's body cushioning her fall, his arms still locked around her. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice rough with concern. "No, I am fine," Beatrice managed, acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, of his warmth seeping through the layers of clothing between them, of his face just inches from hers. You could have fallen in. The water would have killed you in minutes, Wade said, and there was something almost like anger in his tone. You need to be more careful. I was being careful. It was an accident. Accidents can kill you just as dead as recklessness, Beatrice. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips made her heart stutter. They were still lying in the snow, still holding each other, and Beatrice saw the moment Wade realized it too. His expression shifted, the anger draining away to be replaced by something that made her breath catch. "We should get up," he said, but neither of them moved. "Wade," Beatrice whispered, not sure what she was asking for, but knowing she needed something, anything, to address the tension that had been building between them for months. "This is a terrible idea," Wade said, but his hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with a gentleness that contradicted his words. "What is? This, you, me." He searched her face as if memorizing it. "You are Thomas's niece. You are a lady from Boston. You deserve someone better than a cowboy with nothing to offer but hard work and old shame." "That is not your decision to make," Beatrice said, emboldened by the way he was looking at her, the way his hand remained on her face. "What I deserve, what I want, is mine to choose. I already refused one man who tried to tell me what was best for me. I will not let another make that mistake, even if his intentions are good." Wade laughed, a short, surprised sound. "You are the stubbornest woman I have ever met." "Is that a compliment?" "It is a fact." His thumb traced her lower lip, and Beatrice felt heat flood through her despite the cold. "You should go back to the house, Beatrice. Get warm and dry and forget this happened." "What if I do not want to forget?" "Then God help us both," Wade said and kissed her. It was nothing like Beatrice had imagined her first kiss would be. There was no practiced elegance, no careful control. It was desperate and hungry, Wade's mouth claiming hers with a passion that stole her breath and made her forget the cold, the snow, everything but the feeling of being wanted with such raw intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said. "I know. Your uncle might fire me." "He will not," Beatrice said with more confidence than she felt. "Thomas wants me to be happy, and you make me happy, Wade. These last months working with you, learning from you, talking with you, have been the happiest of my life." Wade pulled back enough to look at her properly, his expression serious. "I have nothing to offer you, B. No money saved, no property, no prospects beyond working another man's land. You could go back to Boston, find a good man with a future. I do not want a good man in Boston. I want you, here, building whatever future we can make together." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the roughness of stubble under her fingers. "Unless you do not feel the same way. If this was just a moment, just the cold and the fear talking, then tell me now and we can forget it happened." "Forget?" Wade shook his head slowly. "Beatrice, I have been half in love with you since you told me off that first day in the barn. Watching you work yourself to exhaustion learning this life, seeing your courage and your strength, listening to you talk about the things you care about, it has been the sweetest torture I have ever known. But love is not always enough. I learned that the hard way." "Then we will make it enough," Beatrice said fiercely. "Together." Wade kissed her again, softer this time but no less intense, and Beatrice felt something settle into place in her heart, a rightness that confirmed what she had already known. This was what she had been looking for when she refused Harold Pemberton, when she accepted her father's punishment, when she chose to stay in Colorado rather than write letters begging to come home. This was the life she was meant to live, and Wade was the man she was meant to love. They eventually extracted themselves from the snow and finished freeing the cow, but everything felt different now, charged with new possibility. On the ride back to the ranch, Wade reached over and took her hand, their gloved fingers intertwining, and Beatrice felt a joy so complete it brought tears to her eyes. Telling Thomas proved less daunting than either of them had feared. Beatrice's uncle looked between them as they stood in his office that evening, their hands clasped, and smiled. "I wondered when you two would figure it out," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You have been circling each other like a pair of hawks for months now. You are not angry?" Beatrice asked, surprised. "Angry? I am delighted. Wade is the finest man I know, and you have proven yourself to be far stronger and more capable than your father gave you credit for. If you love each other, you have my blessing." "There is the matter of my situation," Wade began, but Thomas waved him off. "We will figure that out. I have been thinking about expanding the operation, buying the land to the east and increasing the herd. I will need a foreman, someone I can trust to run things when I am not able. The job comes with a house, a salary increase, and a share of the profits. If you are interested, Wade, the position is yours." Wade's hand tightened on Beatrice's. "Sir, I do not know what to say." "Say yes, you fool," Thomas replied with a grin. "And then marry my niece properly, so I can stop worrying about her reputation." They were married in Georgetown on a cold January day in 1879. In a small church with a handful of witnesses. Beatrice wore a simple dress of cream wool, and Wade wore his only suit, brushed clean and pressed for the occasion. Pete and the other hands attended, along with Thomas, and a few townspeople who had become friendly with Beatrice during her occasional trips to town. There was no music, no elaborate ceremony. But when Wade slipped a simple gold band onto Beatrice's finger and promised to love and cherish her for all his days, she felt richer than all her father's money had ever made her feel in Boston. The house that came with Wade's new position was small but sturdy, a two-room cabin that sat on a rise overlooking the main ranch. It had a stone fireplace, a good stove, and windows that let in the winter sun. Beatrice and Wade spent their first weeks as husband and wife making it a home, building furniture from rough-hewn logs, hanging curtains Beatrice sewed from fabric ordered from the store, filling the space with small touches that reflected both of them. The work was hard, harder than anything Beatrice had done before. As the foreman's wife, she was expected to help manage the household accounts, coordinate meals for the hands during busy seasons, and serve as Thomas's assistant in the business dealings. She still worked with the cattle when needed, still rode out to check fences and water sources, still threw herself into the physical labor of ranch life. But now she had Wade beside her, his steady presence and quiet strength a constant source of comfort and joy. They fell into rhythms together, learning each other's habits and preferences, discovering new depths to their connection. Wade taught her to play simple tunes on the fiddle, and Beatrice read to him in the evenings from books she ordered from catalogs, everything from agricultural journals to novels by Dickens and Austen. In the quiet moments, curled together in their bed with the wind howling outside, Wade would trace patterns on her skin and tell her stories about his day, about the cattle he had doctored or the fence he had mended, or the plans he had for improving the ranch. And Beatrice would share her own stories, about the letters she received from her sisters, full of news from Boston, or the ideas she had for breeding better stock or managing the water rights more efficiently. Her father never wrote, and for a long time, that silence hurt more than Beatrice wanted to admit. But her mother sent occasional letters, carefully worded to avoid her husband's wrath, full of small news and gentle affection. Her sisters wrote more frequently, and Beatrice lived vicariously through their descriptions of balls and parties, and the social whirl of Boston that now felt like something from another lifetime. The first hint of real reconciliation came in late March when Beatrice received a letter from her brother, a long missive that she read with shaking hands. "Dear B," it began, "I am writing against Father's wishes, but I can no longer stay silent. Mother has been ill, nothing serious but enough to make us all think about what matters. She cries when she reads your letters and keeps the photograph you sent on her bedside table. Father refuses to speak your name, but I see him sometimes staring at that same photograph with an expression I cannot quite interpret. Pride, perhaps, or regret. I think he knows he made a mistake sending you away, but he is too stubborn to admit it. I wanted you to know that we miss you, all of us. And if you have found happiness in Colorado, if you have truly built a life that satisfies you, then I am glad. You always deserved better than what Father tried to force upon you. Your loving brother, William." Beatrice showed the letter to Wade that night, and he held her while she cried, the tears a mixture of sadness and relief and a grief she had not known she was carrying. "You want to go back?" Wade asked gently. "To visit, I mean, make peace with your family." "Someday," Beatrice said. "But not yet. This is my home now, and I am not ready to leave it even for a visit. Perhaps when we have children, when I can show them what I have built here, then I will be ready to face Boston again." The mention of children made Wade smile. "Is that something you are thinking about?" "I am always thinking about it," Beatrice admitted. "I want to fill this house with babies, Wade. I want to build a family with you to create something lasting and beautiful." "Then we had better get started," Wade said, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Their first child was born in November of 1879, a son they named William Thomas Harper, after Beatrice's brother and uncle. He came into the world screaming, his lungs strong and his grip fierce when he wrapped his tiny fingers around Wade's thumb. Beatrice, exhausted and exhilarated, watched her husband hold their son with such reverence and wonder that she fell in love with him all over again. Being a mother transformed Beatrice in ways she had not expected. The fierce protectiveness, the overwhelming love, the bone-deep knowledge that she would do anything, sacrifice anything, to keep this small person safe. Wade was a devoted father, coming in from long days of work to spend time with his son, singing to him, telling him stories, carrying him around the ranch as soon as he was big enough. Thomas doted on his great-nephew, and the ranch hands became honorary uncles, taking turns bouncing the baby and making him laugh. Even crusty old Pete turned soft when little William grabbed his beard and giggled. The ranch continued to prosper under Wade's management. The expansion Thomas had planned went forward, and the herd grew to nearly 500 head. They hired on more hands, and Beatrice found herself coordinating a much larger operation, managing supplies and schedules with the efficiency she had inherited from her father, however much she might wish otherwise. In the spring of 1881, when William was learning to walk and getting into everything, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, and she spent the last months confined to bed rest on the doctor's orders. Wade was beside himself with worry, hardly sleeping, checking on her constantly. "I am fine," Beatrice assured him for the 100th time. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "Not my woman," Wade said, his jaw set in that stubborn line she had come to know so well. "Not my wife carrying my child. I am allowed to worry." Their daughter arrived in October, smaller than William had been but just as healthy, with a cap of dark hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same storm gray as her father's. They named her Margaret Ann, after Wade's mother and Beatrice's. With 2 small children and a thriving ranch, Life became a beautiful chaos of feedings and diaper changes, broken sleep and stolen moments of intimacy, work that never seemed to end and joy that never seemed to diminish. Beatrice had never been so tired or so happy. The letter from Boston came in December of 1882, and Beatrice knew from the heavy stationery and formal script that it was from her father. She carried it unopened to Wade, her hands shaking. "Whatever it says, we will deal with it together," Wade assured her, and she nodded, taking strength from his presence. The letter was brief and stilted, her father's pride evident even in his attempt at reconciliation. He wrote that he had been wrong to send her away in anger, that he had failed to see her strength and determination as virtues rather than flaws. He acknowledged that she had made a good life in Colorado and asked, humbly for him, if she might consider bringing her family to Boston for a visit so he could meet his grandchildren. "He wants to meet the children," Beatrice said, looking up at Wade. "What do you think?" Wade considered for a moment. "I think that is your decision to make. He is your father and they are your children. But if we go as a family, as equals. I will not have him treating you as some wayward daughter who needs to beg forgiveness." "He would not dare," Beatrice said with a smile. "Not with you there to face him down." They made the journey to Boston that spring, and it was as strange as Beatrice had imagined, stepping back into a world she had left behind. The Crawford mansion looked smaller than she remembered, stuffier. The Persian rugs and velvet curtains feeling oppressive after years of wide open spaces and mountain air. Her father had aged, his hair gone white and his face more lined. But when he held William, when Margaret grabbed his finger and laughed, something in him softened. He apologized to Beatrice, words that came hard but rang sincere, and he shook Wade's hand with genuine respect after learning about the ranch and Wade's role in its success. "You chose well," her father said grudgingly, "better than I gave you credit for." "I chose for love," Beatrice replied, taking Wade's hand, "and it was the best decision I ever made." They stayed 2 weeks, long enough for Beatrice to reconnect with her mother and sisters, to show her children where she had grown up, to make peace with the past. But when it came time to leave, Beatrice felt only relief. Boston was no longer home. Home was a small cabin in the Colorado mountains, a thriving ranch, a life she and Wade had built together from nothing but determination and love. The years flowed past like water, marked by the changing seasons and the growing children. William proved to have his father's affinity for horses and his mother's head for business. Margaret was more artistic, always drawing or making up songs, her imagination as wild as the mountains around them. 2 more children followed, another son named Daniel in 1884 and a daughter called Sarah in 1887. The house grew too small, and Wade built an addition, then another, until their cabin had transformed into a proper ranch house with enough bedrooms for everyone, and a large kitchen where the family gathered for meals. Thomas, growing older and slower, gradually handed over more responsibility to Wade until the day came when he signed papers making Wade a full partner in the ranch. The 2 men shook hands on the porch of the main house, and Thomas smiled with satisfaction. "You have earned this, Wade," he said. "And more importantly, you have built something here that will last. I could not ask for better than knowing this land is in your hands." Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1890, and they buried him on a hillside overlooking the ranch he had loved. Beatrice grieved the uncle who had given her sanctuary when she needed it most, who had believed in her when her own father could not. But she took comfort in knowing he had lived to see her happiness, to know his legacy was secure. As the 19th century drew to a close, Wade and Beatrice stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over mountains that had become as familiar as old friends. William, now 20, was preparing to take over more of the day-to-day operations. Margaret, at 18, was helping manage the business accounts with an efficiency that made her mother proud. The younger children were inside, their laughter floating through the open windows. "You ever regret it?" Wade asked, his arm around Beatrice's waist. "Leaving Boston, the life you could have had," Beatrice leaned into him, breathing in the scent of leather and sage that would forever mean home to her. "Not for a single moment. My father sent me here as punishment, but you were right that night in the snow. Whoever sent me here did me the greatest favor of my life." "I said that," Wade asked with a smile. "You did. The night you first kissed me." Beatrice turned in his arms to face him, and it was true. "Coming here gave me everything I never knew I wanted. Honest work, a purpose, freedom to be myself, and you. Always you." Wade kissed her, slow and tender, a kiss that held 20 years of shared history and promised decades more to come. "I love you, Beatrice Harper," he said. "From that first day when you told me off for dismissing you, through every challenge and every joy, you have been the making of me." "And you of me," Beatrice replied. They stood together as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had watched over their first kiss, their wedding, the birth of their children, the building of their life together. The ranch stretched out below them, thriving and strong, a testament to what could be built with love and determination, and the courage to choose your own path. Inside the house, the children called for them, wanting to start the evening meal. Wade and Beatrice turned from the view, walking hand in hand back into the warm glow of home, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, together as they had always been, as they would always be. The legacy they built was not measured in cattle or land or money, though they had all of those things. It was measured in love freely given and fiercely protected, in children raised to choose their own paths, in a partnership that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. It was measured in the knowledge that what had begun as punishment had become the greatest blessing either of them could have imagined. And on quiet evenings when the work was done and the children were asleep, Wade would take out his fiddle and play, and Beatrice would close her eyes and listen, remembering that girl from Boston who had been sent west in disgrace and found instead a love that transformed her, a life that fulfilled her, and a happiness that exceeded her wildest dreams. This was the story she eventually wrote down in a journal she kept locked in her desk, the truth she wanted her grandchildren to know someday. That love was worth fighting for, that courage came in many forms, and that sometimes the things meant to break us become the very things that make us whole. In the summer of 1895, Beatrice and Wade celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary surrounded by family. William had married a woman from Georgetown, a practical rancher's daughter named Emily, and they were expecting their first child. Margaret was courting a young lawyer from Denver who treated her like the intelligent, capable woman she was. Daniel and Sarah were growing fast, already showing signs of the adults they would become. Beatrice's father had passed away the previous year, and in his will, he had left her a substantial inheritance along with a letter written in his final days. In it, he admitted that sending her to Colorado had been an act of anger and pride, but that watching her thrive despite his intentions had been one of his proudest moments as a father. He asked her forgiveness for his rigidity, his inability to see that love and happiness mattered more than social standing and wealth. She had wept when she read it, and Wade had held her, understanding without words the complicated grief of losing someone you had finally made peace with. The inheritance they used to expand the ranch further, buying additional water rights and improving their stock with breeding programs. Beatrice, designed using principles she had learned from agricultural journals. The ranch they now ran together was one of the most successful in Colorado, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. Wade's name carried weight in the territory, and Beatrice, though she never sought recognition, was quietly acknowledged as one of the sharpest ranch managers in the state. But their greatest accomplishment remained their family, the love they had built and nurtured and protected through 16 years of marriage. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, difficult births and childhood illnesses, financial setbacks and personal challenges. Through it all, they had remained partners in every sense of the word, their bond growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. On the night of their anniversary, after the family celebration had ended and the house had grown quiet, Wade took Beatrice's hand and led her outside. The summer sky was clear and filled with stars, and he pulled her close, beginning to dance though there was no music but the wind in the pines. "What are you doing?" Beatrice asked, laughing. "Dancing with my wife," Wade replied. "Something we do not do nearly enough. We are always too busy working." "Then we should make time," Wade said, spinning her gently. "Because these quiet moments with you, these are what I will remember when I am old and gray." "You already have gray hair," Beatrice teased, reaching up to touch the silver that had begun threading through the dark at his temples. "Then, when I am older and grayer," Wade amended with a smile. "When we are rocking on the porch watching our grandchildren play, these are the memories I want. You in my arms, the stars above us, and nothing between us but love." "I love you," Beatrice said, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love another person, even after 16 years. Especially after 16 years. Because now I know all of you, the good and the difficult, the strong and the vulnerable, and I love every piece." She lifted her head to look at him. "You gave me a life worth living, Wade Harper. You saw me when others only saw what they wanted me to be. You challenged me, supported me, loved me without conditions or expectations. How could I not love you with everything I am?" Wade kissed her then, deep and passionate, a kiss that spoke of 16 years together and decades still to come. When they finally broke apart, he kept his forehead pressed to hers, his hands cradling her face. "When your father sent you here," he said softly, "when you showed up at this ranch angry and defiant and determined to prove yourself, I thought you were going to be nothing but trouble. And I was right. You turned my whole life upside down, made me feel things I thought I had buried, forced me to hope again when I had given up on happiness. You were trouble, Beatrice, the very best kind of trouble. And you said it yourself, the night we first kissed," Beatrice reminded him, her voice thick with emotion. "Whoever sent me here did you the greatest favor of your life. And I meant it, every word." Wade pulled her close again, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "You were sent as punishment, but you became my salvation. My love, my partner, my home." They stood together under the stars, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life that honored them both, who had proven that love chosen freely was stronger than any arrangement made for convenience or duty. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges but never diminishing the bond between them. They watched their children grow and marry and have children of their own. They expanded the ranch until it covered thousands of acres, a thriving enterprise that supported not just their family, but dozens of workers and their families as well. Wade taught his sons and grandsons everything he knew about ranching, about the land and the animals, and the hard work required to make a life in the West. Beatrice taught her daughters and granddaughters that they could be anything they chose to be. That strength came in many forms, and that love should never require you to diminish yourself. In the spring of 1905, as they celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary, Beatrice and Wade took a trip back to Georgetown, walking through the town that had grown considerably since that day in 1878, when Beatrice had first stepped off the train. They visited the church where they had married, standing in the quiet sanctuary and remembering the young people they had been, so full of hope and uncertainty. "You remember what I was thinking that day?" Wade asked as they sat in the same pew where they had exchanged vows. "Tell me," Beatrice said, lacing her fingers through his. "I was thinking that I did not deserve you, that somehow I had been given a gift far beyond my worth, and that I would spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of you. And now I know that worthiness was never the point. We chose each other, B. We built this life together, brick by brick, day by day. We were both broken in our own ways when we met, both running from pasts that hurt too much to face. But together we became whole. Together we became home." Beatrice felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, grateful tears. "I cannot imagine my life without you," she said. "When I try to picture what would have happened if I had married Harold Pemberton, if I had stayed in Boston and lived the life my father wanted for me, all I see is emptiness. You gave me everything, Wade, purpose and passion and love beyond measure." They left the church hand in hand, walking back toward the wagon that would take them home to the ranch, to the life they had built, to the family that carried their legacy forward. And Beatrice thought about the telegram that had arrived 27 years ago, the one that had changed her life forever. Her father had meant it as punishment, as a way to break her spirit and force her to conform. But instead, it had been the greatest gift she had ever received. It had brought her to Colorado, to hard work and clean air and endless sky. It had brought her to Wade Harper, the cowboy who had been meant to teach her a lesson, but had instead taught her what love really meant. They grew old together, their hair turning white, their hands becoming gnarled with age and work, their bodies slower but their love as strong as ever. They sat on the porch of their ranch house on summer evenings, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren, telling stories about the old days and watching the sun set over mountains that had witnessed their entire life together. Wade still played his fiddle sometimes, though his fingers were not as nimble as they once had been. And Beatrice still read to him in the evenings, though she now needed spectacles to make out the words. They still danced in the kitchen when the mood struck them, still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other good night with the tenderness of newlyweds. In the winter of 1918, when Beatrice was 62 and Wade was 67, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted 2 days. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and endless stories about the couple who had built this remarkable family. On the night of the anniversary, after everyone had finally gone to bed, Wade and Beatrice bundled up and went outside, as had become their tradition. The winter sky was crystalline with cold, the stars blazing with fierce light. 40 years, Wade said, his arm around Beatrice. Sometimes it feels like 40 minutes, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together, like there was never a time before you. I know what you mean, Beatrice agreed, snuggling closer. Being with you feels as natural as breathing. I cannot remember what it was like to be alone. You never will be again, Wade promised. Whatever time we have left, however many years or days, we will face them together. Together, Beatrice echoed, always together. They stood in the cold, 2 people who had weathered 4 decades of life side by side, who had loved and fought and forgiven and grown, who had proven that the best marriages were not those arranged by others, but those chosen by the heart. The story of Beatrice and Wade Harper became legend in their part of Colorado, told and retold until the details blurred but the essence remained. The city girl sent west as punishment, who had become one of the finest ranch women in the territory. The cowboy with a troubled past who had found redemption in love. The partnership that had built not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of courage and commitment. They lived to see the world change in ways they could never have imagined. Automobiles appeared on the roads, electricity came to the towns, and eventually even to some of the ranches. Women won the right to vote, and Beatrice cast her ballot with pride, thinking of all the girls who would grow up with choices she had never had. But through all the changes, the core of their life remained constant: the ranch, the work, the family, and most importantly, each other. They had chosen love over duty, courage over comfort, and they had never regretted it for a moment. In their final years, when their bodies had grown frail and the work had passed fully to the younger generations, Beatrice and Wade spent their days on the porch, holding hands and watching the ranch continue without them, secure in the knowledge that what they had built would endure. Wade passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1925, at the age of 74. Beatrice held his hand as he took his last breath, whispered that she loved him, and felt a part of her soul go with him into whatever lay beyond. She lived another 2 years without him, surrounded by family who loved her and honored her, but everyone could see she was simply waiting, ready to join the man who had been her partner in all things. She spent those years writing, filling journals with the story of their life together, wanting future generations to know how it had really been, how they had found each other and chosen each other, and loved each other through everything. On a warm summer evening in 1927, with her children and grandchildren gathered around her bed, Beatrice Crawford Harper closed her eyes for the last time. Her final words were a smile and a whisper: "Wade is waiting. Time to go home." They buried her next to Wade on the hillside overlooking the ranch, their headstones simple but enduring, marking the resting place of two people who had lived fully and loved completely. The inscription, chosen by their children, read simply, "Together always." The ranch continued for generations, passing through the family, growing and changing but maintaining the core values Beatrice and Wade had established. And every anniversary, every significant family gathering, someone would tell the story again, keeping the legend alive. The story of how Beatrice Crawford had been sent to Colorado as punishment in 1878, how she had met a cowboy named Wade Harper who had been assigned to teach her, how they had fallen in love against all expectations. And someone would always quote Wade's words, the ones Beatrice had treasured her entire life: "Whoever sent you did me the greatest favor of my life." It was a story about courage and choice, about finding love in unexpected places, about building a life based on mutual respect and partnership. It was a reminder that what others meant for harm could become the greatest blessing, that punishment could become paradise, and that true love was always worth fighting for. And though Beatrice and Wade were long gone, their love story endured, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of choosing your own path and following your heart, no matter the cost. They had lived and loved and built something beautiful together, and in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all.